Time now for Sid Sixero. This is where I got 60 seconds to talk with my face. Thank you. 32 teams in the National Hockey League, and as the NHL prepares for All-Star Weekend in Florida, the Toronto Maple Leafs have the third best record. Pretty good. Now, one game shouldn't sully my view. After all, the Leafs have had serious goaltending and blue line issues on the health front. So, yeah, so far so good for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But I did not like the tone the other night during their final game before the break. Boston Bruins were in town. You might have heard of it. You can't win a Stanley Cup unless you get through the Boston Bruins. And the Leafs just weren't good. Not good. They lost 5-2. Toronto looked flat. Bruins dictated terms most of the night. And I was kind of disappointed. I was disappointed that Toronto didn't make more of a statement Wednesday. They looked like a team preparing for a vacation. Now, Austin Matthews was out, and Boston's the best team in the league. These are valid things, and I understand it. But at some point, you got to beat Boston, man. You just got to beat them. Just beat them in hockey. Please, Matt Marchese from Sportsnet 590 The Fan joining us. Matty, good to see you. I've known Matty for a lot of years. He knows plenty about puck. Am I over the line here, Matty, or are you throwing that result away? Because Sheldon Keefe was of that mind the other night. These things happen.
Yeah, these things do happen, but you're right. You do have to beat the Boston Bruins. And honestly, Sid, like I look at the Leafs in comparison to the Bruins, and there's a lot of holes there. Like the Bruins have Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy, and they're talking about trading for Jacob Chikrin potentially. And the Leafs defense is it's just okay. To me, the biggest concern coming out of that game was the Michael Bunting incident, where he absolutely lost his mind. He freaked out on the bench. He was having a tantrum. It actually looked like he might cry. And you can't treat officials like that. You can't have that kind of reaction for a guy that draws a lot of penalties and plays that way. Like, was the effort level great in that game? No. Did it look like they were ready for vacation? Yes. I mean, if I was going to Florida right now with the weather in Toronto, I'd be waiting for vacation too. Unfortunately, we're here, and I just thought that the effort was not great. The goaltending, Ilya Samsonov has looked really good at points, but that game he was very off. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you're comparing yourself to the Bruins, if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's a long way to go here.
100%. And I do find it outrageous, Matty, quite frankly, that there's more talk in this town of the Raptors trade deadline coming up next week than the Maple Leafs trade deadline on March the 3rd. I know one's closer than the other. I understand that. But to me, with Kyle Dubas not having a contract past this season, this is like you can't look at that Wednesday night and say, we got a deep enough team. I'm sorry, you can't do it.
No, not a chance. And the other thing is, too, is like, we had Elliot Friedman on the Merrick show the other day, and he says, I don't know what calculator Kyle Dubas is going to use, but I don't know how you make a move with how pressed they are against the salary cap. Yep. And it's true. Like, you have to be really, really creative if you're Kyle Dubas. Here's the other thing. I wonder if ownership is looking at this situation, or Brendan Shanahan, the president, and saying, Kyle Dubas doesn't have a contract after this season. Do we really want him making the big move? I'm not saying that Kyle Dubas would sabotage the team or anything, but that's a real question. Like, do we want him making the move? We saw what happened with the Toronto Blue Jays, for example, when Paul Beeson and Alex Anthopoulos knew they were on their way out. They pushed all their chips in, and then they were gone at the end of the year. I don't know if that happens with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, I don't know if they're gonna deal Matthew Nyes, their top prospect. I don't know if that happens, but I think we're at a point now where the Leafs have to have a long, hard look at themselves and say, is this the year that we're going to push the chips in? And looking at the Bruins and looking at the Hurricanes, and you can even make the case for the New York Rangers, do you really think that you are good enough to win a Stanley Cup unless you have to make 2, 3, 4 moves? And unfortunately, they can't do that at the trade deadline.
No, and listen, valid point about a GM with no contract making moves at the deadline. Problem is, that's a conversation for the summer. This ownership group, Bell and Rogers and everyone else involved, they made the decision. We got no problem with Kyle Dubas making these decisions at March the 3rd, whether he has a contract or not. So we'll see how it goes. Listen, I'm with you. Kyle doesn't seem like we'll sabotage everything to get through like Alex Anthopoulos maybe did or potentially could have with the Jays before he was out the door. But it's definitely a storyline, and we'll see how it plays out. Matty, good stuff. Follow Matt Marchese on Twitter. Listen to him on Sportsnet 590 The Fan, and watch him also on Sportsnet 3. He's basically everywhere right now. Matty, good stuff, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Sid.
Yeah, interesting days in this city hockey-wise, no doubt.